Thank you. We'll get started. Over to you, Chair Fry.
Great. Good afternoon and welcome to the Auditor General Committee meeting. I call this Auditor General Committee meeting of Friday, April 22nd, 2022 to order. This committee meeting is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw. As such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. If any committee member loses connection during the voting process, we have staff on hand to facilitate getting you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The contact information has been circulated to you. Members of the public can view the proceedings via the live stream and YouTube link, which will be tweeted out by @VanCityClerk. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. Committee members are reminded that to please enable their video to ensure quorum is maintained during the meeting under Section 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw if attending virtually. External members of the committee can access the speaking queue by clicking the raise hand icon on WebEx or raise your actual hand. We acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may I have the roll call, please?
Councillor Fry is in the chair. Councillor Hardwick. Councillor Weeb.
Present.
Councillor Bly is on a leave of absence. Councillor Kirby Young.
Present.
Archie Johnston.
Present.
And Karen Kilty.
Present.
You have quorum, Chair Fry.
Great. Thank you, Clerk. Before I begin, I do have some announcements. Any comments on the agenda item can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. That link to and from will be tweeted out again on @VanCityClerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. There are 2 items of business on today's agenda, 1 report and 1 staff introduction. And finally, I would like to remind committee members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the clerk in final written form before the council member introduces them. Please ensure the clerk has received your amendments by using the council meeting amendments DL. All right then, so first item on the agenda is whistleblower study. And I believe we have a slide presentation, and I'd like to invite the Auditor General to please introduce this item. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Just wait for clerks to get the slides up. Great. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Chair, committee members, for being here today to receive my first report as Vancouver's Auditor General, reflecting my pivot from building, which is something I'll speak to a little bit more in a moment, to performing. While it is a report, it's important to note that this is not an audit report, and I did not examine the effectiveness of the city's whistleblowing program. It's a really important distinction. The study wasn't actually part of my audit plan. It was instead prepared in response to a request from this committee. The study is a compilation of publicly available information comparing Vancouver's whistleblower practices to those of similar jurisdictions, those with an Auditor General or equivalent, which provides sufficient public information to allow for comparison. The selection of Ottawa, Toronto, and Calgary is intended to be illustrative rather than exhaustive. Other jurisdictions have whistleblowing programs as well. Please also note that there's no comments made or intended regarding the effectiveness of any particular municipal government's program. Next slide, please. There are a number of definitions of whistleblower. It's generally understood to refer to an individual reporting information they believe reveals activities that are against policy, laws, ethics, safety standards, or similar rules. The City of Ottawa defines a whistleblower as someone who calls attention to a questionable or illicit activity in an attempt to have that activity brought to an end. In the private sector, whistleblower typically refers to an employee, but in the public sector, it's also frequently understood to refer to a person from outside the organization. Next slide, please. Our study showed that practices in comparable Canadian jurisdictions exhibited 5 essential characteristics. First, and I would argue perhaps the most important, the investigative process is conducted independent of management. Independent review and investigation of complaints provides whistleblowers with confidence that legitimate concerns will be taken seriously. Second, the confidentiality of whistleblowers is protected. Third, grounds that constitute a valid complaint are defined so potential whistleblowers understand the kinds of complaints that will be investigated. Fourth, all complaints are reviewed and all potentially valid complaints are investigated. And finally, an investigation process is established that includes a public reporting of the results of investigations, respecting, of course, relevant privacy laws and policies. This outward accountability for the whistleblower process is a key component in assuring whistleblowers that valid complaints have received appropriate attention. Next slide, please. So let's start with the nation's capital. Administration of Ottawa's fraud and waste policy is delegated to the city's Auditor General. Of note, complaints concerning elected officials are to be directed to the city's Integrity Commissioner. Ottawa's fraud and waste hotline is available to employees and the public and is operated by a third party that ensures whistleblower confidentiality. Grounds for valid complaints are spelled out in the fraud and waste policy, which also requires the full investigation of any alleged fraud or waste. In 2021, so last year, 301 reports were received. About a third of those related to alleged misuse of city property, information, or time. About a quarter related to alleged violations of laws, regulations, and policies or procedures, and a quarter weren't applicable under Ottawa's grounds for complaint. 302 reports were closed during the year, with 31 or 10% being substantiated, meaning the allegation was in fact accurate and constituted waste or fraud. Next slide, please. Moving south to Toronto, provisions in Toronto's public service bylaw require allegations of fraud, waste, and wrongdoing involving city resources to be reported to the Auditor General, who reports that all complaints received are evaluated and are handled in accordance with Toronto's privacy policies. The Auditor General's website defines the types of allegations investigated. Reports are accepted from the general public, city staff, and anyone doing business with the city, regardless of where they are. The Auditor General publishes an annual fraud and waste report hotline. Next slide, please. Last year, the office received 820 complaints comprised of 1,200 separate allegations. 743 complaints were closed during the year, so there'd be some overlap. Some complaints were from previous years and others remained still open at the end of the year. Anyway, of those 743, 11% were substantiated in whole or in part. Toronto's Auditor General reports that between 2017 and 2021, a total of $28 million in losses were detected through fraud reports. An additional $1 million in losses were prevented. Additional benefits identified by the Auditor General, and this speaks to non-quantifiable benefits of an effective whistleblower program in general, include deterrence. So the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, of which I'm a member, reports that the very existence of fraud monitoring reduces the likelihood that it will happen. As a result of correcting weaknesses identified in investigations, the Auditor General notes strengthened internal controls and policies and increased operational efficiency, and also that complaints and investigations provide data that inform the Auditor General's work plan. Next slide, please. Moving westward to Calgary, among the responsibilities outlined in the enabling bylaw of Calgary's city auditor is the intake, assessment, and investigation of whistleblower reports, as well as the periodic reporting of investigation results and related recommendations for corrective action. Allegations directed at members of council are reported to the Integrity Commissioner. Whistleblowing reports are received from employees, contractors, suppliers, or members of the general public about the matters the reporter considers to be dishonest or unethical, wasteful, improper, or a matter of public concern. Wrongdoing is a term that's used and is defined as theft, fraud, misappropriation, malfeasance, and breaches of Calgary's Code of Conduct. Historically, employees have accounted for a little more than half of reports received, about 56%. Communication of whistleblower information is limited to a need-to-know basis, so it's kept confidential, and all reported concerns are to be reviewed and assessed. The city auditor is to report at least annually on reports received and investigations conducted, and this is in fact done. And in addition, summaries of substantiated complaints are reported on the City Auditor's website each quarter. Last year, 154 reports were received representing 249 new allegations. 30 of these reports were approved for further investigation. During the year, 33 investigations were closed, 27% of which were substantiated, resulting in 44 recommendations. Next slide, please. Okay, here we are. In Vancouver, the city manager is responsible for overseeing whistleblower policy with day-to-day responsibility delegated to the general manager of human resources. The policy defines whistleblowing as the reporting of serious misconduct in good faith. However, it applies only to city staff. While there is no council-approved policy covering complaints received from external parties, the Chief Human Resources Officer has developed a policy for receiving external complaints. Accepted grounds for complaints include misuse of public funds, conflict of interest, abuse of position, the manipulation or falsification of data, and harm to people or property. The whistleblower policy requires information to be treated confidentially, to be shared only on a need-to-know basis. It also requires a summary of reports received and investigations conducted to be submitted to council each year. However, I was informed that no such report has been prepared or presented. Last year, 113 complaints were logged. Because no summary report was produced and I didn't review the supporting files, I can't tell you how many complaints were investigated or substantiated or the outcomes of those investigations that were in fact conducted. Next slide, please. This table summarizes the study's observations. You'll note that there were some differences in structure and process between cities. However, there appears to be some significant value derived from whistleblower programs in other jurisdictions. Like those jurisdictions, Vancouver has whistleblower processes designed to protect confidentiality. The grounds for a valid complaint are defined, and all valid complaints are to be investigated. This is good. However, unlike comparable jurisdictions, Vancouver lacks a council-approved policy for the handling of whistleblower complaints from sources external to the city. The result of whistleblowing complaints have not been reported to council, and the city's reliance on the Human Resources Department to investigate whistleblower complaints is an outlier compared to other Canadian municipalities with an Office of the Auditor General or equivalent, in that the investigation process is not independent of city management. I actually have no role other than to comply with the policy, meaning any whistleblower reports I receive must be reported to Human Resources. Next slide, please. An update to Vancouver's whistleblowing policy was approved by Council in October 2017, with another review scheduled to take place by the end of October 2020. This review was not completed. In light of this overdue review and the issues noted in the study, I make the following two recommendations to Council. First, Council should direct city staff to revise the whistleblower policy so that it addresses complaints coming from sources external to the city. Fill that gap. And number two, Council should consider whether the city's existing whistleblower policy should be revised in the context that there are now independent offices of the Auditor General and Integrity Commissioner here in Vancouver. Next slide, please. In the Council chamber, we have with us today Andrew Nicklicky, to my right, the General Manager of Human Resources and the city's Chief Human Resources Officer. Because this was a study and not an audit, I did not ask the city for a formal response. However, I did share an early draft with Andrew for discussion. I'm hoping that this committee will endorse my recommendations and recommend them to Council. Assuming you are supportive, Andrew and I are committed to working together and to coming back to this committee with a revised whistleblower policy at our June meeting. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General McDonnell. And we do have questions. And of course, if anybody has questions, please add yourself to the queue. I'll also double check on the WebEx here to see if Archie or Karen have questions and want to raise a hand. First on the queue is Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mike, for the report and the presentation. A couple questions to start off with. And the first one is, do you think in a situation like Vancouver, and you mentioned that we're an outlier in terms of the distinction between not having that external source, that could potentially inhibit whistleblower complaints that the city receives because we have currently, a different structure or process?
Well, the important thing, Councillor Kirbyang, to keep in mind is that whistleblowers, especially those from inside an organization, are taking on tremendous risk. So for a person to weigh the risks and potential benefits of raising a suspected or a potential issue, they have to have confidence that A, their complaint will be treated confidentially and that their complaint will be taken seriously. My concern is that whistleblowing complaints probably should be looked at from the perspective of an independent perspective. And so whether that has an effect or not, I can't say. But I would think that it's a far more legitimate process, having an external review of whistleblower complaints than internally.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question is around, obviously the AG function is a relatively new one for the City of Vancouver, and you're in the process of ramping up the office, but released your first audit plan and getting underway. Do you feel that you have sufficient resourcing to undertake this work, and what will that process look like in terms of how it's resourced and executed?
Thank you. That's a very relevant question, and it's actually something that that Andrew and I have discussed in some detail. One of the models that's out there in other jurisdictions has the Auditor General act as a vetting place for all external complaints, but the Auditor General's office doesn't necessarily conduct all of the investigations themselves. Put it in the context of this, I might be a certified fraud examiner. I'm looking to hire staff who have those skills and who could do this sort of work, but I'm not an expert in, say, human resources. And so in instances like that, I'd want to apply the right tool to the right situation. And so in a situation like that, I would take the information, share that with the relevant department in the city. In this case, it would be human resources, for them to actually conduct the examination, but report back to me on the results of it. And then I, in turn, would report out on the overall results. Not that this would ever occur, I'm sure, but if there were some issues with that investigation that I didn't believe was conducted satisfactorily, then it would get sent back for further work. But you have that independent quality control. I look at that as being a far less resource-intensive approach than my office taking on every single one of those, because if there was, then I think it would have a potentially significant impact on resources. And as you point out, we are just building. I'm very pleased to say that amongst the candidates that we're looking at to join the office, there are people with this sort of background who could rather quickly jump into the role.
Okay. I'll leave it there. I do have an amendment, Chair, but I want to give space for others to ask their questions, so I will come back on.
Great. Thanks, Councillor. Archie Johnson.
Well, thank you, Chair. Mike, a great report, and I appreciate your comments. It's an area that I worked in a fair amount during my career, and I really think it's an important element in terms of an organization's systems of control, and also reducing waste and controlling the issues of fraud. Um, and I certainly support extending the whistleblower policy out to the external sources, and also in terms of the context of it coming into an independent group like yourself versus being handled by HR. Although utilizing HR when it's a specific activity that you can oversee, and also ensure it's being carried out appropriately. I was surprised with the results not being reported. I know the policy suggests that they be reported, but I didn't see any sort of comment on that in terms of recommendations, and I was just curious as to the reasons.
Well, thanks for that question, Archie. Because this wasn't an audit, I really didn't get into understanding the rationale, the reasons why. I just point out that I didn't have the data available because it wasn't being done. My thought would be that with revisions to the whistleblower policy that I'm hoping Council will endorse, that's a situation that would by default be rectified.
Archie, is that good for you?
Yes, it is, Chair. in terms of the, uh, yeah, I think that, I think it's very important to have reporting back so that there's transparency around the thing as long as it maintains and protects um, confidentiality. Um, But I understand what Mike is suggesting, that if the recommendation 1 and 2 are dealt with, then the concern around reporting would be dealt with as well. So that's, I'm comfortable with that response. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Archie. I see Councillor Kirby Young back on the queue to add an amendment. I've just put myself on the queue just to, I was actually curious to ask if you're comfortable, Andrew Nicklicky. I was curious how you see this integrating with your current workflow at HR and how this work could complement the work that your team is doing. I can put your mic on there if you'd prefer.
So, yeah, there's a variety of city policies that we're tasked with the oversight and conduct in terms of investigation. So whistleblower is just another one of those policies. They are absolutely the investigation process of whether it's respectful workplace or whistleblowing or other statutory requirements certainly take up considerable amount of time, but it's work that needs to be done, and we do it, sometimes not as efficiently as we would like to based on workload, but it's important work to do. And as Mike has referenced, the whistleblowing policy itself internally was structured intentionally to permit individuals who were employees to, in a safe way, without retaliation and bringing forward complaints of good faith, the space to actually bring those complaints forward and for the city to investigate them. We don't see a lot of them. We do see a lot more complaints coming in from the outside. We've certainly, with the previous Auditor General and myself, we worked out on a process to actually create a ways and means of intaking those complaints. But for the most part, as much as we've tried to define for the public what should come through this portal, we do get a lot of complaints that are duplicates or triplicates are coming in through 311 or they're coming in through other means. And they don't really, they're not the types of complaints that by definition you would see coming into whistleblowing. So we undertake to investigate every complaint, whether it's anonymous or whether it belongs somewhere else, and we refer those matters to those individuals and departments to actually conduct those investigations and to report out. So it is a lot of work. We can all use more staff, but we do what we can, and we're pretty efficient and effective in terms of dealing with those matters.
Great. So this should work out. What we're looking at this new.
Well, I think it can work out. I think we're going to have to be very explicit in the sense of what we mean by whistleblower, and we're going to be very explicit in the sense of what is a complaint coming in from the outside versus the inside. And I think we have to be extremely clear and intentional in regards to who actually investigates these complaints. Because as Mike has suggested, there are a lot of issues that we need to be mindful of, and we're in the best position to do so in regards to what issues we need to be mindful of when we deal with our unions, what issues we need to be mindful as it relates to privacy and whatnot. So we are by far the best people to do those investigations versus the Auditor General. Just like I don't do Auditor General work, I wouldn't expect the Auditor General to do my work. So we'll just have to make sure that there's clarity in those revisions.
Great. Okay. And then back over to you, Mike. So my understanding is you'll function as a clearinghouse and you will forward the HR appropriate stuff to HR and internal fraud investigation or whatever else may come up that may be more appropriate to you or other scenarios. You'll act as the gatekeeper essentially.
That Thank you, Chair. That really would depend on what council recommends and then what we bring forward in the policy. I think that's a pretty wise model to start with, but I haven't yet received direction.
Sure. And I'm curious, how do you imagine the function would work? Are we integrating, say, with 311, or would this be a separate line altogether? Or
what I've seen in other jurisdictions is a separate portal that flows through the Auditor General's webpage that ensures that any information received is handled only by Auditor General staff to ensure the protection of confidentiality of that information. So my thought would be that information coming to 311 would potentially be either funneled to us or a complainant would be directed directly to our office.
great. Okay. Thanks, Mike. I see Councillor Weave has added to the queue. What do you, Councillor Weave, for 5?
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess my question's kind of to both, and I really appreciate the report. I have heard with an HR complaint from a staff member, how would we deal with that complaint now, and how do we expect that to change if we're able to go with the recommendations? So if someone's feeling uncomfortable in their current job because of promotion or something that's not that's in more of an HR issue, how is that currently dealt with, and how do we see this new stream being a way to better support that employee?
Actually, I would think Andrew might be better positioned to answer with respect to how it's conducted now. All I could say looking forward, Councillor Weeb, is that as a clearinghouse, the first test we would apply is whether any complaint met the criteria of what a legitimate whistleblower complaint was. And if it was, then it would go through a process. If it was not, but it did seem to be a relevant, potentially HR issue, then the default would be to refer the complainant to the appropriate group. In this particular instance, would be human resources. Andrew, did you want
Okay,
to?
and can we talk a little bit about the current process? Because we have had some staff reach out. So I'm just wondering what the current process would be for an employee and what we could see as changes to make that employee feel more comfortable moving forward with allegations to ensure that we can rectify the employee standards that they're dealing with.
Just, I think the example you're using, that complaint likely would not come through the whistleblowing channel. That complaint would
Okay.
likely come in to one of my staff in an embedded business unit, or it could come in through the equity office or a variety of ways, which whether it was the equity office or ourselves, we would certainly look into the issue to determine whether a promotion was legitimately given to someone or not, or whether there was anything else going on. Also, that might, depending if it was a unionized situation, there might be a grievance, so it might come to us in that form. So there's a variety of just using the example you've provided, it could be a variety of ways that issue gets raised, but when that issue gets raised, it does get looked at.
I guess for me, is there an opportunity through this process to really clarify what the channels are for employees? I know that that's something that a lot of employees might not really know what would be the channels to utilize depending on situations that they are in. So it'd be great to know if that's part of this process, is creating a really clarified understanding of what is a whistleblower and how to be utilized, when to go to this equity department, when to go to human resources, just so that our staff feel really secure and supported.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea, and that's why there should be reviews that happen more frequently than they do. Currently, our respectful workplace policy is being reviewed, and so what we try to do is we try to be very clear in the sense of what types of complaints come through these portals and how those complaints should be raised. In fairness, that often, as clear as you can be, sometimes folks they're not sure, or they feel intimidated by process. And so we do the best that we can, and we certainly can continue to do better is, how to inform our staff in regards to if there is something that they want to talk to somebody about, where should they turn to have those conversations?
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Wiebe. Kieran Kilty.
Thank you. I appreciate the report and support the recommendation to council. Just to address comments brought up by Councillor Wiebe, I think it would be important as part of the plan that you're going to bring forward to us in June to address how you're going to incorporate some staff training to make sure that people understand the whistleblower policy. I've found that it's very important to periodically have training available to staff to make sure that the program is effective.
Thank you, Karen. I think that that's a very good point. And if they're assuming that there are significant revisions to the whistleblower policy, training for staff, bringing information out would be quite valuable to ensure that the policy itself is understood and what differentiates a whistleblower complaint from other internal HR human resources related complaints. Did you have anything you wanted to?
Sure. Yeah, most of, if not all of the policies that we work on, we have a process where we sit down, we talk to our unions, we go through amendments, we look to them for some feedback. In a lot of cases, we will incorporate that feedback. And that's sort of the process that we go through. Then when we have a policy, we certainly go out and we do a bit of a rollout, and we start to include that in terms of training or crew talks or a variety of different means of communication. So yeah, any change will be, there'll be a bit of a communication strategy in regards to informing staff as it relates to, what the policy is intending to do, what the changes are, and where do we sort of go next with this.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And thanks, Andrew and Mike. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendations, and then I actually have probably the easiest and most efficient way to do it is to strike and replace to update them. So I'll move them first, and then I'm offering an alternate set of recommendations. I'll do it as a strike and replace for efficiency.
And do we need to move to an amendment queue? I guess we do. No? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just pop myself on there.
Oh. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Okay, so I see the clerk has them on screen now, and essentially this takes the recommendations from the report and from our Auditor General, Mike McDonnell, but makes it a bit more explicit to not sort of consider it, but to recommend that we do in fact revise the whistleblower policy, and recognizing that the Auditor General Committee is a committee of council and this will be a council decision. Also includes language that the Auditor General Committee recommends to council to direct staff to revise the whistleblower policy so it addresses complaints coming from sources external to the city, and asks for that report to come back to council before the end of July, providing a few months to do that work. And then the second paragraph and the distinction here is recommending to council to revise the policy specifically so that the Auditor General is delegated that responsibilities we have just spoken about for the intake, assessment, and investigation of complaints, making recommendations for corrective action, publicly reporting results, except for complaints involving elected officials, recognizing that we now also have an integrity commissioner who has the ability to support appropriate conduct by elected officials in their roles and ensuring that that is adhered to. So that's the summary of and the spirit of the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. And I see Councillor Hardwick on the queue. Councillor Hardwick.
Point of information through you, Chair, to the Auditor General. I'd like to have his feedback on this amended strike and replace motion.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. I look at this as actually an endorsement of my recommendations and a friendly amendment that would be added onto it. So I'm quite positively disposed towards this. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And then to you, Chair, as a point of information, do we require seconders in this forum?
Not in committee.
Right, just confirming. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Councillor Hardwick. I do have my own question of the clerk, actually. Would we need to include in this motion a receive for information clause, this study?
Chair Fry, no, this is a motion. There isn't a motion on the floor, so it would be a direction. Once the committee approves adopt the recommendation, that's the one that you will be included in the minutes, and council will adopt that.
Okay, great. So it will include this study along with, perfect. Okay. Well, seeing no further, nobody else on the queue, we've moved the motion, and I guess we can call a vote. We vote on screen, or can we just do a verbal? So I have to send it in.
Chair Fry, just to clarify, if the committee wants to include the presentation, you can include that language in there as well as a part 3. That would be fine too, and then it would be a package for council to consider.
Just working on it right now.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just clarify, Councillor Kirby-Young, the vote? I saw 3. It went very quickly, and I just wanted to confirm. I saw 3 votes in favor. Was that unanimous? Because there are 4 committee members. Was it just ayes?
It was a glitch. We didn't actually vote yet.
Oh, okay. I did vote. That's why I was wondering. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't. So,
It showed 3 recorded. I saw 3 recorded votes. So thanks for clarifying. Should we take that vote again?
Oh, I've just put myself on the queue and I've submitted an amendment to the clerks.
But can I ask a point of procedure, Chair? Do we need to first complete the vote on this item since we haven't completed it before moving to a further amendment?
We didn't quite call the vote yet, so the clerk interrupted me for a point of
But
clarification.
I believe procedurally we need to deal with the amendment on the floor, do we not?
This is an amendment. This is an amendment to the amendment.
Yes, but I guess I have 2 points of procedure. One is that procedurally, I believe we need to deal with one amendment at a time. And the second one is that if you are chairing and you wish to bring an amendment, you have to relinquish the chair, correct? The 2 points of procedure.
Okay, so that is a good point. Councillor Kirby-Young, can I relinquish the chair to you?
Can we deal with my first point of order first, which is that we need to deal with the amendment on the floor before it can be amended? Oh, you need an amendment to the amendment. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Chair Fry, if I can clarify for the members, the Councillor Kirby-Young's language is actually the main motion because that's the one that she moved. Unless you, so there's only the main motion that's on the floor right now, points 1 and 2. And what I'm hearing is Councillor Fry is proposing an amendment to that, adding the 3rd language. So we would be, if Councillor Fry puts that forward, we will go into amendment Q. And at that time, and you're correct, he would have to relinquish the chair to the next person. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Chair Kirby-Young, over to you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Fry.
Yeah, and just adding a slight amendment that the Auditor General Committee receive the whistleblower study for information, just so that it's included in this package as we send it off to council for consideration.
Okay. Is there any discussion? I'm scanning our panel members as well as our counselors. Not seeing any. Going once, going twice. Then we will call a vote on the amendment to the main motion.
Oh, Councillor Weed.
Clerks, can you confirm when everyone has voted for us, please? Okay, that has passed with none in opposition, and turning the chair back to you, Chair Fry.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Now we'll vote on the main recommendations as amended. And yeah, in favor. And that passes with none in opposition. Great. So thank you, everybody. This concludes item 1 on the agenda.
Point of procedure.
Sure, Councillor Weed.
I'm just wondering, I didn't see Archie or Karen's votes recorded.
They're non-voting committee members.
Non-voting committee members. Okay, thank you.
You are welcome. Okay, the final item on today's agenda is welcoming of the senior staff team at the Auditor General office. I would now like to invite the Auditor General to introduce the team.
Chair Fry, thank you very much. As committee members will recall from the presentation I made shortly after I started in this role, I had a 100-day plan for getting the office up off the ground and making it operational. It took about 128 days, but nonetheless, I'm pretty pleased that we are making that pivot from building to performing. In that 100-day plan, the biggest risk that I identified was the challenge in getting the right people, the human resources challenge, particularly in this age of the Great Resignation, the Great Reevaluation. Anyway, I'm very, very pleased to say that I put together the senior team, and we are moving forward with fleshing out the rest of the team. I wanted them to come here and be introduced to you, because you're going to see them again and again as we are producing reports. Each of my members of the senior team will be engagement leaders. It's a defined term under Canadian audit standards. They actually lead the engagement and are responsible for sign-off, although I have ultimate responsibility for reporting out. They are the ones who actually are in charge of conducting the detailed work. So I thought it was important that they be here. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, please, I'm going to introduce them one by one. First, if I may, is our Deputy Auditor General, Laurie Barrett. Laurie, if you could come on up here, say hi. With over 20 years in the public service, Laurie spent the last 14 years leading performance audits in the Office of the Auditor General and the Auditor General for Local Government. She recently has been in senior management roles as a performance audit director and as a director with the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General of the province of British Columbia. Laurie is not an accountant. She's a real person. I can say that. She holds a master's degree from the University of British Columbia, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce her as my deputy. Thanks, Laurie. And we have our audit principles, which is the next layer down, if you will. First, we have Stacey Lee. Stacey's been with us for a couple of weeks now. She joins the team with 10 years of financial, IT, and internal audit experience previous to joining the city. She was a senior manager with Grant Thornton's risk advisory practice. She's also experienced in audit software implementation, which, as you may recall, is one of the big ticket items that we have to get in place this year. Stacy's a chartered professional accountant, a certified internal auditor, and a certified information systems auditor. Welcome, Stacy. Last but not least, we have Jenny Lau. Jenny literally just joined us this week, but she may look rather familiar because she joins us from the city's internal audit department. She has an IT background with a focus on data analytics, which is an incredibly valuable skill in this increasingly digitized world. For the past 15 years, she's worked in the private and the public sectors in audit functions. She's a certified internal auditor and a certified information systems auditor. So, welcome to the team. Okay. Oh, that's it. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Mike. That's super exciting. Have any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Very nice meeting everybody today. Thank you for your hard work now and to come, and joining us here at the City of Vancouver. So thank you very much and welcome. And with that, that concludes the last item on our agenda. Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. We don't need a seconder, so all those in favor say yay.
Yay.
Yay. Great. Any opposed say nay. The motion carries unanimously, and the meeting is adjourned. Our next scheduled Auditor General Committee meeting is on Friday, May 20th, 2022 at 1 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.